In Part 1 of our look at Congress, we trace the roots of the legislative branch outlined by the U.S. Constitution. We characterized the demographic attributes of members of Congress and identified factors that affect their chances for re-election. And we assessed the role of the committee system, political parties, and congressional leadership in the organization of Congress. In this second part of our look at Congress, we will identify three of the most significant powers of Congress, we'll analyze the factors that influence how members of Congress make decisions, and we'll conclude by evaluating the strategic interactions between Congress, the President, the courts, and the people. So let's begin. The Congress makes clear Congress's authority to make laws. In fact, Congress has the authority to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution its formal powers. Today, Congress not only makes laws that deal with major policy issues, it also spends a great deal of time drafting, debating, and disposing of the nation's budget, as we shall see in this section. It also has a key oversight role through the War Powers Act, congressional review, approval of nominations, and impeachment. Through these processes, Congress can check or limit the power of the other two branches of government. After a bill has been introduced, it goes to the appropriate committees for consideration. Committee staff members may research different aspects of the bill, and the committee chairperson decides whether to allow the bill to even have a hearing before the committee. That gives the committee chair significant power, because they can pigeonhole and kill the bill on their own authority. If the subcommittee approves the bill, it goes to the full committee, where it may undergo some additional changes and amendments before it is presented to the full floor of the House or Senate for a debate. The House can form a committee of 100 members who will debate and amend the bill to streamline the process so that all House members do not have to speak. If the bill survives this process and is passed by the full House, it goes to the Senate for consideration. The Senate may hold up a bill by a hold or a filibuster. A hold allows for additional reviewing, negotiating changes, or even an attempt to kill a bill. A filibuster, however, is a deliberate attempt to halt legislation by using long speeches and unlimited debate to prevent a bill from even being debated or voted on. The final stage of Congress's lawmaking power is for a bill to be approved by both the House and Senate, often requiring a conference committee to negotiate a compromise of the bill and the two different versions passed by each of the House and Senate, and then passage by the House and Senate of that compromised version of the bill. But both houses of Congress must pass a bill in identical form, word for word, before that bill can go to the President's desk for his or her signature or veto to become law or to be killed. A bill must go through a very carefully prescribed process in both the House and the Senate before it can become law. This is a long and very difficult process, and because there are so many steps at which it can be killed, most bills never become law. A bill must pass at every single step of the process that you see on this screen in order for it to become law. If it fails at even one step, then the bill is dead, and it never becomes law. And so you can see, based on this process that you should become very familiar with, it is very difficult for bills to actually pass both houses of Congress and go to the President's desk. So very few bills that are introduced in Congress actually survive this process and become law. But if a bill does survive that long and tedious process, and it has won the approval of both houses of Congress in identical form, word for word, then the President has the final opportunity to approve the law by signing the bill, in which case it becomes the law of the land, or vetoing it and saying no to it, sending it back to Congress for a potential veto override. Here, President Barack Obama, surrounded by Vice President Joe Biden and legislative leaders, signs into law the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, known as Obamacare, which reformed health care in the United States. Since the 1920s, Congress has also required the President to submit a budget to Congress every year. Under this plan, Congress can alter or change the allocation of money to different sections of the budget. but could not increase the total amount of spending proposed by the president. When President Richard Nixon refused to spend money that the Democratic-controlled Congress approved for certain programs, Congress passed the Congressional Budget Act of 1974. That act created the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, a nonpartisan agency that helps members of Congress analyze spending bills. The act also detailed the process of reconciliation, which limits debate on controversial issues affecting the budget and avoids the threat of a filibuster in the Senate. This calendar here gives you a sense of how long it takes Congress to develop the budget in a given year and what some of the deadlines are. But each year, Congress must pass a budget to authorize and allocate spending for every department and agency in the federal government. And this is the process that it goes through each year. Congress also has an oversight function, meaning it oversees the other branches of government. You should become familiar with the different ways in which Congress can oversee the other branches of government. That is often a question on the AP exam. Congress can conduct hearings, which are often televised to question executive branch agency officials to determine if laws are being enforced and interpreted as Congress intended, to make sure money that Congress has allocated is being spent in the proper way. This is called an oversight function. Other oversight functions include approving the executive branch's nominations for cabinet offices, federal judgeships, and other key roles. That is a job of the Senate. Perhaps most visibly, Congress can exercise its oversight function through its power to impeach and remove federal officials from office if they break the law. Fed up with the way President Lyndon B. Johnson handled the Vietnam War, Congress in 1973 passed the War Powers Resolution. When Nixon vetoed the act, Congress overrode the veto and the resolution was passed anyway. The resolution allows the President to send troops into action only with the approval of Congress or if the United States or its territories are under attack. The resolution also requires the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing troops to foreign soil. Perhaps most importantly, the President must withdraw any troops within 60 days if Congress fails to declare war. Some presidents have complied with this law, other presidents have not. But the law has never been reviewed by the Supreme Court, so its constitutionality has never been determined, even though many presidents think that this is an unconstitutional limitation on the president's war-making power under Article 2 of the Constitution. The Congressional Review Act of 1996 allows Congress to nullify agency regulations and actions by the Washington, D.C. City Council. Under this authority, Congress has 60 days following an administrative regulatory action to pass a joint resolution of legislative disapproval, which must also be signed by the President. Congressional review has been used very infrequently since its passage, though there was a distinct uptick in 2011 when House Republicans questioned a record 11 regulations in the first 9 months of the new Congress. The President nominates judges to the Supreme Court, but the Senate has the power to reject nominees. Before announcing their nominees, presidents often ask senators for approval to limit the rejection of those nominees. Ultimately, Congress's most direct form of oversight is its power to impeach. The Constitution is fairly vague on both the impeachment process and the offenses for which the President or federal judges can be impeached. The Constitution merely suggests that these federal officials can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Historians generally have agreed that the framers meant this to include significant abuses of power. The House votes to impeach officials, but it is the Senate that conducts the trials and can remove someone from office. Over the years, the House has voted to impeach only 17 federal officials and only 2 presidents, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. Of those, 7 were convicted and removed from office. Neither president was convicted nor removed, and 3 were resigned before the process was completed. Only 4 resolutions against presidents have ever been passed. In 2008, Congress created the Troubled Assets Relief Program, known as TARP, to aid in restoring order and liquidity to the nation's financial system. It also created an oversight panel to assure that this program was working efficiently and effectively. Law professor Elizabeth Warren, who in 2012 was elected to the Senate representing Massachusetts, chaired this committee. She is shown here testifying before the House Budget Committee. Today, as I said, she is a United States Senator from Massachusetts. When voting on policy issues, members of Congress must decide how to best represent their constituents. Representatives or senators who listen to the concerns of their constituents but use their best judgment are voting as trustees. When they vote the way their constituents want, they are voting as delegates. A Politico at times votes as a trustee and at other times votes as a delegate. Much thought goes into making policy and program decisions. Representatives and senators generally consult many people from different groups, interests, and backgrounds. These include political parties, constituents, colleagues in caucuses, interest groups, lobbyists, and political action committees, and staff and support agencies. Representatives and senators vote for legislation often along party lines, meaning Republicans vote with Republicans and Democrats often vote with Democrats. The influence on political parties on members' votes cannot be overstated. Political parties have a significant influence over their members in Congress and how they vote. Congressional party unity is a measure of the solidarity of members of a party. In recent years, they have voted according to their party on 90% of the legislation. Congressional party leaders have used key committee assignments, re-election campaign support and fundraising, or threats to support party members to vote with the party. Former Representative Tom DeLay, a Republican from Texas, earned the nickname the Hammer for his relentless persuasion of colleagues during a time of divided government when different parties control the presidency and Congress. Members of Congress have to keep their constituents in mind when they vote as well. Representatives and senators vote in keeping with prevailing opinion in their districts about 2/3 of the time. Otherwise, they may not be reelected. That's why some lawmakers from the South were reluctant to support civil rights legislation during the 1960s, and why lawmakers from districts with significant senior populations today are so careful to support Medicare and Social Security, which are very popular with senior citizens. Members tend to be keenly aware of how their constituents feel on so-called wedge issues, such as same-sex marriage, insurance coverage for contraceptives, and flag burning. These are issues that tend to drive a wedge between voters. Hence, they are called wedge issues. Members and their staff members that work for them spend a substantial portion of their time meeting with constituents in Washington, D.C., and in their district offices back in their home states. They also monitor calls, letters, emails they get, and social media to see who is supporting them, who is against them, and what they are saying. Failure to remain in touch with his or her constituents at home may decrease a member's likelihood of winning another term in Congress. Here, longtime Arizona Senator John McCain meets with constituents at a town hall meeting. He is also up in a difficult re-election battle in this current election. Congress considers a wide range of issues and bills. No one can be an expert on all of them, which is why Congress has a system of specialized committees. When members must vote on bills they know little about, they may turn to colleagues for advice. That's when log rolling or vote trading can occur. Log rolling often takes place on specialized projects in specific districts. A lawmaker whose district is unaffected agrees to vote a certain way in exchange for a future vote in his or her favor. Members also turn to groups of other congressional representatives who share similar backgrounds or interests. Most of these so-called Special Interest Caucuses are informal in nature, although some of them, such as the Black Caucus and the Hispanic Caucus, are more organized. A primary function of lobbyists is to provide information that helps convince lawmakers to vote in the interest of the lobbyist clients. Such information can include research, data, and other facts. Organized groups can persuade undecided members to vote their way, or cement the votes of their allies by providing lawmakers with reasons to justify their decisions back home. In return, such lawmakers can often count on these interest groups and political action committees when it comes time to raise money for re-election. Congressional representatives also rely heavily on information provided by their own staff, as well as the staff of agencies and committees. On average, House members have an average of 17 staff members that they hire who work for them directly. Senators have an average of 40. Staffers are divided between those who work for them in Washington, D.C., and their offices there, and those who work for them back in their home districts. Additional help from members can also come from personnel at the Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, the GAO, Government Accountability Office, and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. These three offices provide support to congressional representatives. And if you pause and look at this slide, it will describe the work of each one of these congressional support agencies and how they support members of Congress in doing their jobs. When they drafted the Constitution, the framers envisioned that Congress, the President, and the courts would exercise their own powers and work to keep each other in check and limit each other's power. Since the 1930s and the Great Depression, however, the President has often held the upper hand when it comes to institutional power. And in times of crisis, Congress has shown itself willing to yield even more power to the President to see the nation through trouble. Yet that doesn't mean that Congress is unwilling or unable to use its authority to cut funds from an administrative program it questions or challenge appointments to the federal courts. The balance of power between Congress and the executive has fluctuated over time. Following the death of Abraham Lincoln, Congress tried to take over some of the authority Lincoln had as president. Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act, which prohibited Andrew Johnson from getting rid of any of the cabinet members from the previous administration. Johnson responded by firing Lincoln's Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. The House voted to impeach Johnson, but the measure failed in the Senate by one vote. Even so, the attempt weakened Johnson, and Congress again became the center of power and authority in the federal government. That development didn't last forever. Beginning in the early 1900s, a series of strong presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson, shifted more power and influence onto the president. The Constitution provides for numerous forms of checks and balances. One of these is judicial review, in which the Supreme Court reviews the laws passed by Congress to ensure their constitutionality. Early in our nation's history, the courts used this authority sparingly. In more recent times, however, the Supreme Court has indicated a willingness to challenge the Congress's actions. Lately, the court has, on average, struck down 2 laws per term as being unconstitutional. Congress, however, has its own checks. It is Congress, after all, that sets the jurisdiction of the federal courts and determines the number of federal judges on each court, as well as the boundaries of judicial districts and circuits. And Congress lets the courts know when it is unhappy with their activity. During recent Congresses, for example, several members unhappy with Supreme Court actions on different decisions have tried to cut back on their jurisdiction or tried to recommend reducing the number of members on the court. Congress is the branch of government that was intended to be closest to the people. In fact, it can often be called the people's branch. The people elect its members, who are supposed to represent the people's interests. In recent years, however, more and more people are calling into question the motives and dedication of the members who are elected to serve. Congressional approval ratings hit an all-time low of 8% in 2014. Political scientists believe these ratings reflect the people's frustration with increasing partisanship, gridlock, and unproductivity of recent Congresses and its failure to get anything done on behalf of the people. This graph shows the American public's views on Congress as an institution and individual members. Poll respondents were asked, do you approve or disapprove of the way Congress is handling its job? And do you approve or disapprove of the way the representative from your district is handling his or her job? You can see from this graph that Americans often have much more disgust towards Congress as a whole as an institution than they do with their individual member of Congress. People tend to like their own member of Congress, but dislike Congress as a whole, which leads to very high re-election rates for a very unpopular Congress. This includes the video lecture on Congress, Part 2.